All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is the advanced small group training. And I think you probably are all here today because you've been running Alpha for a little bit. I think most of you said you have been running Alpha before. I think there might be one or two newcomers here, but that's newcomers to Alpha, but that's okay. Wherever you are on your Alpha journey, I think one of the most important questions to ask is, how do I run an effective small group? Because by now you know that they're a little bit different from a Bible study small group. So you might feel like your small groups could use a little bit more energy, some better conversations, and you might just be looking for what are some great ideas for making really effective small groups. So today we are going to talk about 5 essential elements to having meaningful, dynamic small groups. And so these 5 essentials are relying on prayer, creating the right team, inviting the right guests, extending radical hospitality, and facilitating great conversation. So if you notice, the first 3 dynamics, essentials of a dynamic small group don't even happen in the small group time. Our extension of radical hospitality and facilitating great conversation, that does happen in small group, but there are some things that we can do ahead of time to key ourselves up for an effective small group time. So the first is our reliance on prayer. You know that prayer is the heart and soul of every Alpha, that everything on Alpha begins, runs, and ends with prayer. It is the most important thing, and yet so many churches don't emphasize prayer enough. I hope you all have a prayer team who is praying specifically for your Alpha, who's on site, on campus with you, praying while you guys are in your small group time. A lot of churches miss this step. They might ask a few people to pray for Alpha, but they don't come to the Alpha. They just stay at home. And what we really want is for the prayer team to be an actual part of your Alpha. So they're there. They can then very easily transition during the day away, and on the healing night, they can then become your prayer ministers. So your hosts and helpers are freed up to attend to their guests. So so if you don't have a prayer team yet, it's not too late. You can start one at any time. If you're in your week 4, I heard a couple of you are in week 4. If you don't have a prayer team, just start with week 5 and just try to get some folks to come and join you and be praying. We want to have the churches praying. So sometimes, very often, the Alpha team is praying and then the prayer team is praying. But if the church isn't praying, then Alpha continues to be, their thing, what the Alpha folks are doing, and it's not our thing. So one of the best ways of getting the congregation to feel like Alpha is something that we're doing, which then helps to have the congregation invite their friends to come, is for there to be prayer at your church, from the altar, from the pulpit, prayer for Alpha. We want to be talking about Alpha somewhat regularly on a Sunday morning, not just in the lead up to Alpha, but continue, in the announcements during when your Alpha is going on. Just, again, be praying for Alpha. Remind people that Alpha is going on. It's not too late to come. Even if it's week 5 or 6, you can still come. So having that regular conversation about Alpha keeps it on the forefront of your parishioners' minds. We also want to be sharing testimonies of transformed lives regularly from the pulpit. This really includes the congregation in what's going on, because they'll hear repeatedly about changed lives. And then they'll begin to think, oh, I want this for my friend. Maybe next time I want to invite somebody to Alpha because I want my friends to come to know Jesus. So, so we don't want to just do it like the 3 weeks leading up to Alpha, because that doesn't give our parishioners enough time to be thinking about, praying about who to invite. You can also use the 21-day prayer campaign cards that are available on My Alpha or through Outreach. And, little instructions are right there, but essentially you put down the names of 3 people that you're going to commit to praying for to invite to Alpha. Again, you can do this at any time. You can be running your Alpha and then already be planning. If you're planning on doing a winter Alpha, now is the right time to be giving out these cards and asking people to begin praying about who they'll invite to your next Alpha. So, so that you can also do something like a 24/7 prayer room, where you just ask, you run that for a few weeks, leading up to an Alpha, and just get your congregation praying about Alpha. Again, I already mentioned the importance of the prayer team. The prayer team can also be the ones who would lead your huddle, that 30-minute time before Alpha begins. The leader of your Alpha, which is probably most of you on this call, you can kick the thing off, share announcements, share what the questions are for that week, ask if there were any problems from the week before. You can kick off the huddle, but then you can ask your prayer ministers to be the ones to actually lead the prayer portion of it. You can also have them ask them to do one-on-one prayer ministry with every host and helper. Imagine that. Imagine how good after your full day of work that would feel if one of the prayer ministers just prays for you personally before you begin Alpha. So then we also want our hosts and helpers praying for their guests in their small group every day by name. This is one of the ways that we extend radical hospitality in our small groups, because as we pray for them every day, we're remembering their needs, so when we come in then the next week and follow up and ask, well, how is that thing going that you mentioned was so challenging last week? And you ask them about it, they'll be surprised that you remembered. The way you remember is because you've been praying for it every day. So when you have the congregation praying, the prayer team praying all evening of Alpha, the 30-minute prayer huddle, the hosts and helpers praying daily for each guest by name, this kind of prayer really does make a difference, because it changes us, changes the way we feel about our guests so when we're in that small group time, and it also gives space for Holy Spirit to move. And again, this is what we're doing. We're setting the table for the Lord to come and to make his move. So one of the things that we always say on Alpha is that Alpha is perfectly designed to fail unless God shows up. There's no real secret in the sauce. If you all were Michael Jordan fans and ever saw that old movie Space Jam, you might know that, everyone of the Looney Tunes were all looking for Michael's secret stuff. They wanted to know what it was. There's no secret stuff other than prayer. Prayer is the secret stuff. So we have to make sure that we are praying. Alpha doesn't transform lives. Our role on Alpha is not to convert people, but to introduce them to Jesus and pray for his Spirit to come. The work is the Holy Spirit's, and we really can't overemphasize that. One of the definitions of evangelism that I just love is joining the conversation God is already having around you. Imagine that people, our guests, are having conversations with God before they come to faith in him. They might be crying out and saying, God, if you are real, then would you fill in the blank? They might cry out to him in a time of crisis. They're curious, who is this God? That's why they're there. If they're completely closed, they're not likely to be at your Alpha. So they're already having conversations with God. So just remember that. But we don't know what those conversations are. And the only way that we can get on the same page with the Lord is by prayer. So a question you might want to ask yourself now, after we've looked at this first essential element, is, how is our reliance on prayer? How is our reliance on prayer? All right, so the second essential is creating the right team. Now, for most of you, you're already into your Alpha, so you already have your team, but this is something you're going to want to think about for the future. And there's also time during that huddle time, and any other subsequent training that you might want to do during the course of your alpha to begin to reinforce some of these things. If you begin to sense during this section of the training, I'm not sure that I have the right people on the team, you can do some work with them. So as we think about our team, of course, that's, the leader, the leader. There's also the MC, the hosts, the helpers, the whole hospitality team, which is the dinner and setup crew, who does the welcoming, your person running your tech, and your prayer team. So every member of the whole Alpha team should really be reflecting the 5 creative values of Alpha. Is that we are friendly, we are inspiring, we are bold, authentic, and simple. So what do I mean by this? Well, friendly, we are welcoming and accepting. We can't extend radical hospitality if we're not welcoming and accepting of everyone, even the atheist who might be there, even the one who talks too much. We have to figure out a way to be accepting and friendly of them. Inspiring. We have to be uplifting and invitational, positive, even if some people are negative who are in your group. We need to be bold, exciting, energetic. This is good news that we are sharing with them. And so we need to be excited about it. Authentic, we want to be humorous. We want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be a know-it-all. And then simple. What does that mean? It means no Christian jargon, no deep exegesis. We're just keeping this simple. We want people to be introduced to Jesus, the person of Jesus. So honestly, how well do these words describe your team? Or is that old Saturday Night Live character, the church lady, a better description of your team? If we think of our work on Alpha as winning people to God rather than introducing them to Jesus, that kind of that sort of approach, that sort of mentality doesn't help us be authentic. Because that makes us like kind of the know-it-all, like I'm trying to win you to Jesus. It's not that. I want to introduce you to Jesus and let Holy Spirit do his work. What does it mean to be simple? Well, if we are just using Christian jargon or and trying to win somebody, again, as an argument, trying to win a theological argument, we're not really being simple. We just want to have a real conversation with Jesus, about Jesus with people. And one of the best ways to do that really is to talk about our own testimony. If we're asked a question, not to go into deep theological arguments, but to just say the difference that Jesus has made in our lives. Sometimes in our effort to be meek and mild, Christians forget to be bold and inspiring. But this is a place where we can be bold and inspiring. So think about your team. How do they navigate the tension of these values with either their personality type or with their view of what faith sharing should look like? So if these words don't really describe team members, then maybe you want to think about how you can communicate these values to your team and help them grow in areas where they're currently weak. You could pick one of these values or 2 of them and just kind of introduce them at the beginning of your huddle time and say, we want to remember like that we need to be friendly and inspiring. We want to keep our language simple. You can begin to introduce some of these things in your weekly huddle. Notice as you listen to what your hosts and helpers say, if some alphas will do a little debrief at the end of the alpha, others will save that until the huddle time in the beginning and the next week. So however you do it is perfectly fine. But check in with your hosts and helpers. How's it going? What are some trouble spots in your small group conversation? And then notice where you might need to press into perhaps one of these 5 values based off of what your hosts and helpers are saying. You always want to make sure that you hold a training before your alpha begins, before the 11 weeks begins, and that you're this is a great place to remind them or introduce these values to your team. And make sure for that you are including even seasoned veterans, because everybody can use a refresher course on this, because Likely many of your team members are coming from having done Bible study during the year or the intervening time between their last alpha and now, or they're in a small group or a home group or a life group, whatever you call it at your church. And so we can slip into habits that are a little different than what we want to see on alpha. So it's really good to remind them of this. And that's really just a good time for continued learning, sharing stories, and prayer. And finally, you might also want to think about, is there someone in your church that you could invite specifically to be on your team because they carry one or more of these values really strongly within themselves? So you might even now just want to ask them to be on your team in some capacity and just give a small group an extra helper, or ask of them to be on the prayer team, but you want them to be in the huddle because they carry these values with them. So I just want to do a little bit of a deeper dive right now, just for a couple minutes, into the role of the host, because the host is just so important on alpha. So an alpha host, as you know, is hosting a conversation and making people feel safe and included. We really want to make sure that the host is not a teacher. So this is something you might want to, reiterate after a couple of weeks in your huddle time, that the host isn't a teacher. They're not even a leader. Think of them as a skilled dinner party host. My family has lived in, my husband and I lived in France before, and I've lived there a couple of times. And one of the things that I have noticed in France is that a French dinner party is very different from an American dinner party. In France, the dinner party is an opportunity to meet people and have fellowship with people that you didn't already know. And so what you find around the table is a skilled host will make sure that everybody is involved in the conversation. We'll make sure that the conversation is not revolving around the host, but that the guests are getting to know one another and are finding things in common, and making sure that everybody feels welcome, invited, and accepted. And so you might want to think about that. Think about if you've ever been at a dinner party where you don't know everybody, and just how does that flow go? That's what you want to have happen at your small groups. The host needs to be personable, a good listener, non-judgmental, someone who can ask great open-ended questions that spark good conversation, someone who doesn't insist on answering all the questions. A host has to be able to throw a question back to a group. So if a direct question is asked of the host might then say, well, that's a really good question. What does anyone else think about this? And so if you have someone who really loves to teach, they might not be a really great alpha host because they're going to be too tempted to answer the question. It's much more important on alpha for hosts to listen than to talk. They also have to be comfortable not bringing every conversation to a conclusion. That's a tricky thing, because we're not trying to drive to a conclusion. We want to give our guests things to think about so that they can go home during the week and continue mulling them over. A good question you might ask yourself if you're considering someone to be in the host role is, would I want my best friend who doesn't know Jesus, or a savvy or cynical coworker, to be in this person's group as a host? Is this person comfortable in sticky conversations? And if not, maybe that person needs a little bit more training, or maybe that's just not the right role for that person. So it's important to match people with the best role for them. So a question you might ask yourself now is, are we creating the right team? So then the third essential is inviting the right guests. So who is in your alpha? It's important to reflect who's there. Think about, okay, our alpha has just started. Who's there? Many alphas are formed solely or almost exclusively from people within the church. And if that's your situation, no matter how much you pray and how perfect your team is, your alpha won't feel like alpha should. It's fine to begin that way. Like my church is relaunching Alpha after a year of not doing Alpha, and there's a new pastor, and his desire was for everybody to come to Alpha. If you haven't done Alpha in a little while, then you haven't done Alpha. So you need to come because you need to know this tool that is yours as a follower of Christ to invite your friends to come to Alpha. So if you haven't been in a while, you're not going to invite your friends to come. So you need to come. So that's fine for starting out. Some churches, as they're launching Alpha, they will run it on a Sunday morning because they believe so firmly in having everybody understand what Alpha is as a tool for them to invite their friends. But Alpha is designed for people who don't yet know Jesus. So we need to have people from inside and outside the church on our Alpha, because that makes for a really robust conversation around the Alpha small group table. And we talk more about that, about getting people from outside the church to come on our Creating an Invitational Culture training. We'll be doing one again soon, but there's always one available on our YouTube channel. So Alpha teams are also meant to self-perpetuate, where your guests from outside the church return as helpers on the next Alpha. And then hopefully they would bring their friends with them. If they've had a good time on Alpha, they've begun to know who Jesus is a little bit more, then hopefully they would bring their friends with them. And these people don't have to be well versed in the Bible. Remember, we don't want people giving a lot of answers as hosts and helpers. As a helper, their role really is to quietly pray for the guests, to quietly pray for Holy Spirit to come. So this helps build your team from people who are outside the church. But you'll notice then that very quickly they're becoming part of your church because they're already serving on the Alpha team. And this is what makes the team self-perpetuating. At Holy Trinity Brompton, the church that created the Alpha course, only about a half of the team is seasoned. The other half comes from people who have just finished their first Alpha. So look for your next Alpha team members to come from your current course, and then be proactive in inviting them to return as helpers. And if you want to grow your Alpha, you grow your team, right? Because we say that there's usually about a 1-to-3 ratio of team members to guests. So you grow your team, and you have your team members inviting people to Alpha, and that's one of the best ways to grow it. So what do you do then if you have some clearly very strong Christians who want to join Alpha as a guest? And this isn't your first time launching, or you're relaunching Alpha. Maybe you've been doing Alpha for several years. I would just recommend, like, be bold with them. That's one of our values, is to be bold. Tell them, like, okay, well, come, but bring an unbelieving friend. Like, don't just come by yourself, like, come and bring a friend. And if they can't, and some people literally do not know any non-Christians. A recent study Alpha did in partnership with Barna revealed that 38% of church-going Christians report that they have no unbelieving family member or friends. So, so they truly might not have anybody to invite, but you could ask them to be on the prayer team, or you could ask them to organize a Taste of Alpha watch party in their small group or in the adult education class. You could have them show the first video and talk about it in their own small groups, and then discuss who they could invite. You could encourage them to, just do something like that, but then with a view to maybe opening up their own home group to being an evangelistically positioned home group for, during the next time you're running Alpha, and they would just be running it at their home. Remember, you want your Alpha to be filled mostly with people from outside the church. That's where you're going to get to once everybody in your church has gone through Alpha. It's a wonderful thing to be able to offer newcomers to your church. Come to Alpha, because you don't know where they're coming from theologically. They might say, "Oh, I've been in church for all of my life." It's like, yeah, well, yeah, but we don't know what church that was. So it's a great kind of equalizer, in a way that what kind of church they have been to, and everybody has had some of the theological basics by that point. So to have more vibrant small groups, we have to have the right people on Alpha. And so that means you have to go and invite them. Until your church is known in the community, like HTB is in London, as being known as the Alpha Church, getting the right people to Alpha really is a boots on the ground effort. It is our church parishioners who do the inviting and get people there. And remember, it's always a come with me. It's not, oh, you should do Alpha. It's I do Alpha. I love it. It's a safe space to explore difficult questions of life, faith, and meaning. And I'd love for you to do it with me. So a question to ask yourself now is, are we inviting the right guests to come to our Alpha? So the fourth essential is extending radical hospitality. So now we've arrived at the Alpha night. So we really want to take a deep look at what we're doing on that Alpha night to make our guests feel welcome. One of the things that we say on Alpha is, on Alpha, you belong before you believe. And this is a really important distinction to make, because at church, if you think about it, you really have to belong. You really have to believe before you belong, because we ask an awful lot of our outsiders who are not, steeped in Christianese to do a lot of things that they don't normally do in their normal non-churchy life. So I'm going to read you just a few things from a book called How to Revive Evangelism, which I highly recommend. It was written by the former executive director of Alpha USA. And it was based off of a lot of the research that Alpha did along with Barna. So I'm just going to read you a couple of things just to get you thinking about how is it that we in our churches actually make people feel like they have to believe before they belong. What we sometimes fail to recognize is that many welcoming environments can actually make people feel very uncomfortable until they, the visitors, make a change. When we're welcoming, we unintentionally communicate that, hey, you can sit at our table or in our seats. You can hear my thoughts. You can receive my messages. You can attend my events, and you can enter into this gathering and online space with us on our terms. Welcoming environments can often inadvertently feel like assimilation chambers. We even use that expression, assimilation, for some of our strategies, staff roles, and church departments. There's a natural distance that a welcoming, assimilation-focused environment can unintentionally impose on a discerning post-everything audience, by which he means post-Christian, post-pandemic, post all that. It's all smiles and kind words and even hot coffee. But at the end of the day, too many welcoming environments withhold the beyond the surface level belonging and involvement until the new person figures out what behaviors and beliefs are expected, and they adhere to those. They can never quite feel like they belong until they decide to sign on the dotted line, or swear off all the old ways, or speak in the new vernacular. And when outsiders finally make their way into any spaces within our churches or lives, too often we require them to believe like us before they can experience true belonging. So that's what we want to make sure that we avoid on Alpha. That's what I mean by on Alpha, you belong before you believe. We think about your church. You might stand to pray sometimes. You kneel to pray sometimes. You sit to pray sometimes. Sometimes you pray out loud all together at the same time. That's weird. Sometimes you just pray quietly. Sometimes somebody else gets up there and prays. Sometimes they read a prayer. Sometimes they pray just like out of thin air. How does that happen? Sometimes you sing sitting. Sometimes you sing standing. How do you know what to do if you're a newcomer? We want to make Alpha feel so welcoming that they're not saying, what am I supposed to do? So creating a welcoming, non-threatening environment on Alpha is essential. Remember, your guests who don't go to your church are likely scared. Remember the first time that you went someplace new, any place, pick a place, where you felt everyone else knew far more than you did? It's intimidating, right? So think about your guests' first moments with you. What does minute one look like? and go way out to the parking lot. What does minute 1 feel like? The first 2 minutes, the first 5 minutes, the entire night. How do they get from the parking lot to the building? Picture the scene. How would you feel if you were brand new? Maybe you had some church hurt or just were not comfortable. How would you feel in those moments? So put your best cheerleader, your funny, outgoing person up as your MC. Find some captains of fun at your church and put them on the team. Someone to warm up everyone. Have people like meeting guests from the front door in the parking lot. If you have a long walk from your main door that they're going to walk through to wherever you're holding your alpha, make sure you have a hospitality team welcoming them at every step along the way. If there's a turn to make in the hallway, make sure there's somebody there welcoming them. You might consider having a well-curated, upbeat music list playing. That's not necessarily all Christian songs, but just songs that don't have any lags in the tempo, that just sort of help them settle in from the beginning, that there's not this like awkward silence that's happening. One of our alpha leaders over in South Jersey recalled this story one time of this woman that he saw who was nervously sitting in the parking lot, and she finally like came over to the door, and he said to her, "Don't worry, it's okay. This isn't church. It's alpha. There's food. There's new friends. It's fun. It's going to be okay." So just continue to remind people this isn't church, it's alpha. It's alpha. It's different. We need to pay attention to what that experience might feel like for a newcomer. So hospitality is our friendly and generous reception of others, but on alpha, hospitality also means listening well. Author and professor David Augsburger said this: being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable.
Mm.
That's pretty intense. For the average person, being heard really means the same thing as I love you. In small groups, that's where we get to show this type of listening-based hospitality. Some of it happens around the dinner table, but it really mostly happens at small group, because that's where we're going to risk the more personal things. We have our conversations around the dinner table, but in small group, it's what do I feel? What do I really feel inside about that question that was raised in the film series that week? So we want to show warmth and welcome and kindness and love by listening well and asking questions, by remembering what they said one week and then following up the next week and asking them how they were doing with that. And the way we can remember what they said from one week to the next is by praying for them every day. So hospitality is helping people feel seen, known, heard, and loved. So a question to ask now is, how hospitable is my team? And how can we practice more of that stuff? The fifth essential is facilitating great conversation. So we've looked at 4 of the 5 elements, and we are just now getting into this small group time, you know, the radical hospitality and creating great conversation. These are 5 tips to help you have great conversation that helps people feel like they belong in your small group. Again, we want them to feel like they belong, even though they don't yet believe. So we want to ask open-ended open-ended invitational questions. You know, so I think many of you know what an open-ended question is, you know, the kind of what and how, sort of questions like that. I want to just begin again reading from Craig Springer's book, How to Revive Evangelism. There's something very peculiar about the way Jesus chose to interact with people during his short time on earth. The Bible records 307 questions that Jesus asked, along with 183 questions others asked of him. But do you know how many times Jesus gave a direct answer? 8 times. And some scholars argue that on only 3 of those occasions was the answer he gave completely direct. Jesus was 40 times more likely to ask a question than to provide a direct answer. And this, coming from the one and only person who walked the earth and actually knew all the answers. So Jesus was more interested in having a conversation than he was in answering questions. So think about some of these questions that you might ask. What do you think? How do you feel about? Tell me more about. A closed question would be, do you think Jesus is God? It's closed because the answer is yes or no, and it doesn't invite the guest to really ponder what's going on inside and what they really think about that. You could open that up by saying, who do you think Jesus is? Or what do you think it would have been like to hang out with Jesus? That kind of a question gets the imagination going. It's not just, the cerebral, thinking. It gets the imagination going. Or you might even flip a question to the negative. Instead of saying, what stood out to you most in the video, you could say, is there anything in the video that you struggled with or you still have questions with? Or instead of asking, how has your experience of reading the Bible been? You could flip it to the negative. What challenges do you have in reading the Bible? And that way, when you flip it to the negative, it lets your guests know that it's okay to struggle with those things. One of our local Alpha leaders turns Nikki's statement about Christianity into a question. Have you ever found Christianity or church to be dull, boring, or irrelevant? So I think that's also a really great idea. So another thing that you could do is use a picture to get the imagination going, to get the conversation started. So this is actually, if any of you have ever run or seen the Alpha Youth series, this is one of the resources that's available in that deck, in their My Alpha. This is a pool where you would use this on week 1 or week 4, both you could, because it's nice to see the progression. And you would ask your guests to just pick a person here and say, where are you in your faith journey? Are you in the pool, like swimming laps? Or where are you today as you think about yourself and why you're here on Alpha? It might be a better way to frame it for the first week. Because you might be the guy there, like it's a swimming pool and he's coming in with his flippers and he's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. There might be the person, looking in the mirror, taking a picture, a little selfie. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here either. There might be the guy in the green bathing suit just dipping a toe in and just checking it all out. So it's a really great conversation starter piece. There's also some other resources that are like decks of cards. So there's one called Connect Deck, and there's another that Andy Stanley's church, North Point, created called Story Cards. And they're just pictures. And you would just throw a few of those out on each small group table and pick a card that describes either where you are on your faith journey or why you're here tonight, why you think you're here tonight. And then you could revisit it again on week 4. How can I have faith? That's kind of a nice time to revisit any one of these assets. So again, you could play it on week 1 after the name game. And it helps people visually. I think there's something more that you can talk about there. So you might want to consider those when I send out a follow-up to this with the link to YouTube. I'll also attach this pool slide in case you want to use it. And then secondly, we want to be encouraging. Don't forget, some of these guests are going to be scared to be there. This might all seem overwhelming and intimidating to them. Just keep the conversation open and encouraging. This is a safe space for guests to say whatever they feel. So affirm everything that they share. If someone reveals something really personal and honest, be super encouraging of that bold step that they took. just make sure you don't disagree with anyone. If someone says something very strange or that's really not at all theologically correct, just respond with, thank you for sharing that. It's an interesting point of view. Does anyone else have something to contribute? Don't get into an argument, as Nikki and Pippa say in that one interview, don't try to win the argument, win the person. If they have a good time, they'll come back, and that's when we let Holy Spirit do his work. So small group is a time for everyone to share their thoughts without being corrected. Think of it again as that dinner party conversation, a time for a group of friends to build authentic, long-lasting relationships. The point of small group is not to give answers, it's to facilitate conversation. So encourage different viewpoints. Our goal is not agreement among the guests, but for them to feel heard and safe in asking questions. And then we want to make sure that we are being ourselves. Pay attention to our body language. 93% of what we say is nonverbal. We communicate what we mean 55% by our body language, 38% by our tone of voice, and only 7% by the spoken word. So be aware of your body language as the hosts and helpers. Hosts and helpers, take note of what you're doing with your eyes in the silence. We don't want to like bore our eyes into people like, oh, please let somebody talk kind of a thing. No, we don't want silence to feel like pressure. And don't be afraid of that silence. Avoid that temptation to give token answers to tough questions. Just be okay with the tension of not knowing, why do bad things happen in this world? I don't know. I really struggle with that too. Is really that kind of honest answer can be the most important thing that your guest is going to hear. Our guests have authenticity radars, and they can sniff us out if we're not being genuine. So don't feel like we have to have all the answers. We also want to make sure that we are not answering all the questions. And for some of us, that is the hardest thing. We like to help people, and we like having the right answers. And we've also been on this journey for a lot longer than some of our guests have. And so we just kind of instinctively want to help them out on the journey. But as soon as a host positions him or herself as the one with all the answers, people will stop engaging with one another, and they'll just talk to the host. So if someone asks the host a specific question, just try deflecting that to someone else, resisting the temptation to just answer it, as the host. We also need to make sure that we resist the temptation to reteach any of the content that was in the videos or any super cool Bible facts that we know. We just need to give God space to work out the content of these talks into their hearts, and not just on Alpha Night, but throughout that whole week. And this is so important because we are in a post-Christian age now, and in a post-Christian world, folks want to be able to come to truth on their own. So if we just keep telling them what our truth is, that just is not helpful. It's not helpful like it was in the 20th century. We have to just present information for them to process and pray for Holy Spirit to help them discover the truth. So that's why the prayer team is so essential. And so to reflect here a bit, what does your small group look like? Are the guests engaging with each other, or is there frequent redirecting of questions back to the host? When we serve on Alpha, we have to constantly remind ourselves that we don't drive the bus. It's our guest's journey with Holy Spirit, not ours. And so we just need to let them be on their journey. A couple of potential landmines. You might have to remind some of your guests that they're not the teacher either. They might not be in the host role, but they might be acting like a teacher. So if you have a guest who seems to dominate the conversation, try to connect with them afterward and encourage them to make space for others to share. You might want to just approach this like letting them in on a little secret. Like, we want to make sure here that people that we're going at the pace of the slowest guest, and that guests have the opportunity to really discover who Jesus is on their own. And so we might even ask them to serve on the team as a helper. And then, then we let them know what the helper's role is to largely remain silent and pray. So that's another way of handling. If you are asked like kind of a out of left field question, the host can just respond with that. That is a really great question, and I'd really like to explore it with you. And perhaps we could talk offline about it, but let's just stay on tonight's topic for right now, but then just to make sure that you follow up with them. So that's a way you can kind of deflect something that is just really not the topic for the night. And then finally, don't be afraid of the silence. We all process at different speeds. So we have to give space, as I said, for the slowest person, in the group, especially for those who aren't verbal processors. On average, they say it takes 6 seconds for someone to be able to think about an answer to a question and then process what they feel about it. But it can take some people as long as 30 seconds, and that's a long time to wait in the silence. But we want to make sure that we give everybody space. So it can be really helpful to state your small group guidelines at the beginning, and then perhaps give a reminder a few weeks after a few weeks. This is how we're going to interact with one another. You might say, let everybody talk, listen to one another, be aware of how much you're talking compared to everyone else, allow for some silence so our quieter guests can speak. Maintain confidentiality and respect different opinions. So you might share all of that with within each of your small groups. Some small groups even like have that printed up on a piece of paper and that they give out and then remind people of after a few weeks. So we get richer conversation when we allow people to wait and process their own answers to the questions, and making sure that everybody has a chance to talk. So as we just wrap up, try to think about which one of these is the most difficult for you. You think for your team, relying on prayer, creating the right team, inviting the right guests, extending radical hospitality, or facilitating great conversation. If you want to, you can pop it in the chat, and that might be a place where you're going to press in a little bit more. I'm going to open it up for conversation now for questions. Here we go. And if anyone has some questions. Yeah, Dave.
You said something about Alpha on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I know a church is doing it where that becomes the sermon for the morning is the 25-minute Alpha talk, and then they break up into small group time and do a meal. There are some other churches that have done just the first week that way for familiarity, and they just launch it that way by 1 week doing it that way, not the whole series. And then I know other churches that run it right afterwards, and so people are already there on a Sunday morning and then they run it. So those are just a few different options, but I think the model of running it for everybody doing it on a Sunday morning is probably more likely to happen in a smaller church. I also know of churches that use it as a way of planting their church. So if it's a new church and they really are on a growth trajectory, then they will run Alpha on the Sunday morning as a way of growing their church. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not during Mass, it's after Mass, or that's just not clear to me if you did the Sunday thing.
Okay, so there's one church I know that's doing it. They're a vineyard church, and so they don't have the order of the service is not a liturgical church, and so there's not specific elements that they always want to have in. So there's probably there's time for worship. I don't know exactly how they're doing it, but they don't have all the elements of a more liturgical service that they would want to build in. So they're doing it that way on the Sunday morning.
Let me run this one idea. This really is good. It might be something we want to. We're going to do our first Alpha class in January, And part of the challenge in our parish right now is that with the new minister,
Mhm.
we're trying to rebuild because there was a period where there was some dysfunction. And so we lost some of our shaker and mover parishioners
Mm.
who dispersed across the community to other places and things. And we haven't gotten all of those people back. So trying to flesh out our hospitality team, our group leaders and helpers, hosts and helpers, those kinds of things is a challenge. And so we are struggling a little as we slowly move to getting this thing in place. So I was just thinking, what if just during one of the masses, maybe in late November, early December, just show the first movie
Mhm.
in place of the homily.
Mhm.
Have a couple introductory comments at the conclusion of that film, a couple more comments that this is the kind of thing that you're going to see. Then we'll follow with discussion. We're going to have a meal and rah, and everyone is welcome. Let us know if that is something you like by, dropping a card in a basket out in the reception area, something like that. I
Mhm.
don't know. Is that hokey?
I don't think it's hokey at all. I think we have to, in this busy, over communicated world in which we live now, we have to find a way of getting this in front of people. And
Yeah.
I've created a couple of new resources that are available on our website for folks to use, and we've piloted them at my church. So my parishioners still are like, I don't
Yeah.
know what alpha is. I'm like, how can that be?
Yeah.
So you try putting this stuff out again and again, but it really gets their attention. The other thing about doing what you just suggested, Cliff, is that it will get your parishioners' attention that, oh, this
That's what I
is
want.
just a thing over here. This is our thing. We're all doing this. And, the pastors agree with this, the priests agree with it, the leadership team, we're all on board with this. This is becoming our thing. And that is essential if you want it to actually be like Alpha, of this place where parishioners come and can either really like reignite their faith or ignite their faith for the first time, because it's an encounter with Jesus and with the Holy Spirit, and also a place where they can be discipled. And it's a place where they can bring their friends who don't yet know Jesus, and a place for them to live out their calling to co-mission with Jesus. So it's all of these things. And
Right.
but it's you can message it in all these different ways, but until people see it, they don't get it.
Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. Very helpful.
And if
Just so you know, Cliff, on my end, I ran into a problem with it, getting a video shown with the father. So give yourself time to plan it and give him time to process it, and really talk to him about the importance of it, because Bonnie has suggested this before. So
I'll just tell him that Bonnie said do it. And he can call her. No,
Absolutely.
that works.
he's very supportive. So I mean that
That's
part
awesome.
is not, but here just the kind of frustration of trying to get this thing underway. And I have a co-partner with me who has participated in Alpha down in Johnstown in Our Lady of Sorrows, and we took a small group of 4 or 5 people plus our deacon to Hollidaysburg, who is in their second or third year now of doing Alpha, and we observed. So we've got interest by a few of us. Then we wrote a letter for Father to send out to some of the people that we know have special skill sets that we wanted to put on our planning team for the hospitality to work the kitchen area and those couple there. And we sent out 18 letters signed by, the priest, our pastor, 0 responses.
Mm.
Yeah.
For everyone then that we did a follow-up face to face and asked the same question that was in the letter, now we have 4 positive responses. So, somehow we haven't, that excitement or interest or at least knowledge of Alpha is not out there, and we know that. We certainly know that. So we're just looking for some dynamic way of just shotgunning, fire hosing it, and doing it at a mass or immediately after a mass before people race to the parking lot to get out of there because they're all so busy and other things are more important. You get the point. Yeah, thank you.
Can I share?
Yes.
Am I on? Okay. I wanted to mention a couple things that we did in promoting Alpha, and what worked and what didn't work. Okay, you're probably already aware of what works and what doesn't work, Bonnie. And
No, it's
probably
great to have
someplace in all the resources that you guys make available, we could have probably learned and maybe didn't see it yet. But we put these door hangers out. We got 1,000 of them. And they were really easy to deliver. And I mean, if you get a couple guys and one guy go down one side of the street and another guy down another, especially if you got twin homes or row homes, in no time you've delivered a couple hundred of these. And if you get, your youth group together, they could blast out 1,000 easily. But we had our first Alpha last week, and nobody said that they came because of this, or I don't think I asked specifically if any of those people even got one of these, but if you would think that was unsuccessful, but I think it did. I think there was some things that happened as a result of doing this. It got some laborers excited about being invested in Alpha, and going door to door like that gets you out into the harvest fields, caring about people that live in real places and real homes. And it gave a couple opportunities to share with people that we met along the way individually. Now, I don't think any of those people actually came to our Alpha yet, but we got to, it's not maybe, hitting a base hit sometimes is a good thing. Maybe these people next time will want to come to Alpha, or somebody else will share something of the gospel with them. I don't know, but I know what it helped do to me just by walking some of these around, and it was I think it was, well, I didn't have to put out the money to buy these. These were about 19 cents a piece or something. It wasn't that much, but I know it helped transform me. So that's a positive thing. We also got some big Alpha posters. I think we bought them through Alpha, and we posted them in a shopping center. Almost every shopkeeper let us post one in their window. And one shopkeeper, we were posting them in the window facing outward so people walking outside would see them. One shopkeeper said, well, can you put 2 of them in, one facing outward and one facing inward, so the people in my shop could see it also? But by that time, we had run out of them. We only had one left. We even put one in the local beer distributor. So,
Yeah.
it was pretty cool. People going down to get their favorite beverage could see it. And it was just a kind of a good exercise to get the word out a little bit into the community, a little bit about Alpha. Alpha used to be bigger in our area than I think it is now, but I'm seeing signs of a resurgence in a sense. By the way, I want to come to Johnstone. I can't
Yeah, you guys are on
It's-
fire.
It's
I know, we're taking a road
unbelievable.
trip. We're gonna do a Philly road
Yeah.
trip. We're gonna swing by State College on our way.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. I'm like, my first thought was you guys are going to get a flood in a good kind of way, you know? Yeah. The Holy Spirit flood your area, bless your area. I'm going to be praying for you guys. I'm so excited that you got such a group. You know, God commands a blessing when you join together in unity like this, and I'm seeing signs of that same unity in Southern Chester County and our area. Churches gathering, getting together for prayer and for other events and other things.
Yeah.
But the walls coming down for Jesus. You know, he wasn't about building walls. He was about breaking them down and bringing in his kingdom. So I just pray his kingdom come. So anyway, for like it or not, we didn't get anybody coming to Alfred for this, but it did have some benefit, I believe. And it was pretty inexpensive. Oh, the third thing we thought about, we didn't do too much of, is they had these yard signs. They're really inexpensive too. They just have wire hangers. You just put your foot on, put them in the yard, and they'd be a great thing for your congregation to put in their yard if they're willing to. Letting people in the area know, hey, there's Alpha in the area, and people are like, well, what is Alpha? You know, at least get people churned up about what is this, asking the questions, and then maybe those same people get an invite to come, and they say, oh, okay, well, sometimes it takes a long process of thinking about something, and then finally last minute say, okay, I'm going to go to that. So we do have a church in our community just does this for their normal, just to make everybody aware that they're a church in the community. They have different ones that are members of that church that you walk around the community and you see, oh, that person goes to that particular church, or they see, oh, there's this church in this community that I go to. But we could do the same thing kind of for Alpha too. We were just kind of, there was so much to do, but that's one thing we didn't do, but something we thought of. I'm all about the promotion. I was trying to get a skywriter, a plane with a banner and all that, but maybe next time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those ideas, John. I think they're terrific, and none of it is wasted. I mean, what we know about all the ads that we do is that it's largely brand awareness. 84% of people come to Alpha because of a personal invitation.
Yes.
So, but the more they see Alpha stuff, the more likely they will be to then at one point say, oh, I want to go and do that. Or there's then, as your congregation gets more comfortable with going into the neighborhood a little bit door to door and meeting their neighbors and having a conversation, someone will say, oh, yeah, I saw that Alpha thing. Yeah. Okay. All right. But they might not do it just from the door hanger, but that's creating the awareness, that's creating the curiosity that, eventually they will,
and some conversation, I can see Mrs. Smith saying to Mrs. Jones, oh, did you get one of these?
Yeah.
So
What is that? Yeah.
who knows? And maybe Mrs. Smith is a believer and she gets the opportunity to share Jesus with Mrs. Jones.
Exactly.
Never know.
Yeah.
Bonnie, can I ask a quick question?
Yep. Dave actually just has his hand raised.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Nope, no, it's fine. And you're next, Judy.
Okay.
I just want to ask, you mentioned the YouTube channel that we could watch the training sessions on the YouTube channel.
Yep. So that's Alpha Mid Atlantic is the name of our YouTube channel. And every training that I do is there's a version of it that is up on that channel. So there is an older version of this one, but sometimes people just, will want to see the one that they signed up for and missed. So, and certainly we're still recording. So this Q&A session will be on there as well. So I'll get this up there, but there's old ones up there. There's creating an invitational culture. There's Run Alpha training. in a 2-hour time block and in 2 1-hour time blocks. There's an excellent live version of this when Craig Springer came into the Philadelphia area 2 years ago and spoke on this. That session is up there. There's a Reaching Gen Z conference where we had the head of Alpha Youth at Alpha USA come and speak. So all those things are up there. And we also had a training if anyone's interested in starting an Alpha in Prison team. So we have a training on that up there too. So.
Well,
Yeah.
Carol and I, each week, we watch the session that we're going to present that night.
Yeah.
We watch it on YouTube. So we're already ready for the video when we get to church. So we got a heads up on it.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I
Yeah.
also just created, I created a resource for churches to use. It's a video-based resource to get the conversation about faith sharing going in our congregations, because we don't do that as much as like when I was a kid. It was always about like sharing your faith with other people. So it's called Made for More. And if you went on alphamidatlantic.org on our website, go to the training page, and you'll scroll down. It says 4 congregations, and you'll see it there. You just put in your name and email, and then you can have access to it. So it's 6 10-minute teachings on our calling to co-mission with Jesus and spreading the gospel, why we resist this calling, what the cultural shift to being post-Christian, what does that look like? What does that mean for us? The importance of listening-based conversation now, how to move our conversations from just very casual into something that's more meaningful and ultimately spiritual. And then we get an opportunity to invite someone to Alpha. And then finally, how do we extend an invitation to Alpha? So it's it starts a bit more like, what did Jesus call us to do? Why don't we want to? And just gets narrower and narrower into like, how do we actually do this thing, like inviting a friend to come to Alpha? So we piloted it at my church this summer, and it was very well received. It got just wonderful conversations going about what is our responsibility? You know, what does Jesus want me to do with this life that I have? Well, one of the things is share the gospel. Judy.
Yes, it was a quick question. In the beginning, you said to keep inviting, even that, like, we're in week 4 this week, and I still wanted to put something in the bulletin, but then I started questioning myself. Maybe I shouldn't put something in the, okay.
But you know what, if someone comes, like even on the very last week, and it's their first week, and maybe they'd been debating coming or whatever the reason was for not coming, and they come and they like it, then they'll come back the next time you run it for the whole series. So they're just dipping their toe in. They're like that guy in the green bathing suit, just dipping a toe in, and then, you know, if they like it, come back. Yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
That's great. Are there any other questions?
No, I got a chatter though on one of my tables that just has to teach all the time and and just answer every question for everyone. And it's like, so pray for me because I gotta address that. So.
Yeah, and the best we will, and the best thing is to really address it, you know, and it really is like letting them in on a secret, you know. This is how we're doing it. We have to just let people discover on their own. And yeah.
I'm probably going to make up some kind of little card. You know, I hope it looks funny, but a card with somebody going like this or something. You know, shh, and be able to and threaten to hand it to people. You know, but, you know, at least mainly I'm concerned. One of our elders of our church suddenly appeared. I was told he was going to come the night before our Alpha, but I would have, you know, got him off into the training, which I understand he's taken today or yesterday.
Okay.
But I heard back that this fella spoke too much, basically. So it's my my task to have a talk with him, I guess. But he said he's watched the training. He's a wonderful guy, and I think he'll understand. But even for our guest, if we have someone who's kind of consistently that way, if they would have some kind of sense of humor about it, realize other people got to share. But if I had some little card to
I love
just
that idea. Yeah.
as the MC say, you know who you are,
I'll just share one more thing with you so we were in week 3 last week, and I'm like, how can we get more people to come? So I bribed them. I offered a prize. So the email was that I sent out on Wednesday night was bring a friend and you get a prize. So they all got a lottery ticket if they brought a prize. So
Great. Oh, I love it. Yeah,
that
do it.
Fun.
We'll give them a free meal. Well, we give them
Yeah.
Free meal.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well,
The
that's
program definitely, like the whole journey, just lets you become more creative. I can see it in all of you talking, and it just makes your creativeness just like bloom the spirit. So it's beautiful.
What part of Pittsburgh are you from, Judy?
The north,
The north.
North.
Okay.
yeah, Frankel
Oh.
Park area.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really interesting area. Yins all of you.
Yes,
All
yes, we
Yins
is.
out there.
Y'all come downtown with us.
Oh, well, it was great to all be together today. Thank you, everyone, for joining and stay in
Thank
touch.
you.
How
Yeah,
things are going.
we'll
Yeah.
be looking for the fire in Johnstown.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.